Chapter 14. Mark's mother stood in the cabin doorway, smiling at Carl. So he's a wild brownie in every sense of the word and has forgotten his tameness. Want to bet? Mark's father looked at Ben, who was near the edge of the trap. Mark had lassoed a salmon with a piece of wire and given it to Ben. Now he squatted on his heels nearby, smiling as he watched Ben devour it. Mark's father shook his head. Seems I'll never be right about that bear. When I heard those shots the other day, I was sure he was dead. I'm glad he's not. Wonder what brought him down here a mile past from the spawning stream. I'll guess that in this bear mind, he associates this cabin with the shack where he spent almost 5 years of his life, where he slept and ate. Ellen said it was his home. Apparently he remembers it and feels an attraction. Mark and Ben spent the forenoon getting acquainted again. Mark lassoed a half a dozen more salmon out of the trap and Ben ate them happily. Then the two wandered down the beach, Ben poking his black nose into holes and around the base of old stumps, looking for something to satisfy his appetite. At noon they returned to the cabin. Ben lay in the shade of the cabin while Mark ate lunch. His mom had made a raisin pie and Mark took a wedge out to bed. The heat of the day began making itself felt. Ben finally padded out behind the cabin and started off through the brush. Mark said, "He's leaving, Dad, but he's not heading toward the spawning stream. Where's he going?" "I don't know," his father said. "He's free. He can go wherever he likes." "Can we just follow and see where he goes, Dad? I don't want to lose him again." His father said, "Well, okay." He reached inside for his rifle. "Be back in a little while," he told Ellen. Ben was in no rush. He lumbered along, sniffing at clumps around rocks, delicately nibbling a bit of grass here and there, but moving steadily off toward the mountains back of the cabin. Mark's father said, "I just don't understand. Ben should be heading for the spawning stream in the meadow like any normal brown bear." Some minutes later, they emerged from the scant brush and stood at the base of the loose shale mountain, several 100 feet high. Without hesitation and seeming to know exactly where he was going, Ben began climbing, picking his way expertly over the loose shale. Mark and his father followed and found the rock ledge where Ben spent lazy afternoons. Mark looked around. There was ample evidence that Ben had laid up there many times before. He went to the edge of the ledge and looked down the shale slope. The spawning stream boiled out of the mountain behind him and flowed to the left, and it was the shape of the Windy Point trap and the shore cabin. A white senior cruised several miles at sea, and far across that water, the Elias Range reared a necklace of white heads encircling the sound. Mark said, "Ben has come up here a lot, hasn't he, Dad?" "I bet he comes every day," Dad said. "Is that why these hunters in the Red Plain didn't find him?" "Probably." Carl made himself comfortable in the shade of a rock and laid the rifle beside him. Ben stretched out in the shade of a bush and rested his head on extended forepaws. Mark sat down cross-legged beside him, idly scratching his ears as he stared dreamily off out at the ocean. He could understand why Ben came up here. It was peaceful and quiet and nice. It was warmed by the sun, and at the same time, it cooled off by the breeze, and an animal would instinctively know that the chances of being surprised or found up here were pretty remote. They remained more than an hour, and the warmth of the rock and the stillness made Mark drowsy. Finally, his father said, "We gotta go. Come on, Mark." "But, Dad, if I leave Ben now, he'll go back to the spawning stream." "Of course he will. He has to eat. It's as natural for him to go to the stream as it is to you to go home for dinner. Anyway, what good do you think it would do to stay with him?" "Well, I thought when he got ready to leave, I might coax him back to the cabin," Mark said. "You don't need to. He'll come." "You really think so?" "Well, he came last night, saved our lives. He'd been coming to the cabin pretty regular. I've seen his tracks along the beach, like your mom said. He probably associates the cabin with the shed where he lived for 5 years. You really think he remembers?" "Well, he remembered you, son, and the shed was all he'd known for most of his life. He's only been free a few months during the latter part of the winter." "Yeah, he remembers, and he'll be back. Anyway," his father added, "he apparently comes up here every day. If he doesn't show up at the cabin for a few days, we can hike up here and find him." "All right," Mark patted Ben between the ears. "You come see me now, you hear?" They started back down the slope. They were almost to the bottom when Mark glanced back and said in a surprised voice, "Dad, look!" There, almost daintily picking his way after him, his head was swinging, came Ben. At the bottom, he raised his nose, sniffed loudly at Mark's face, then fell in right at their heels and lumbered after them with his pigeon-toed gait all the way back to the cabin. Mark's mother stood in the doorway, smiling. Carl spread his hands. Like it or not, we got the big lug back again. Mark lassoed a half a dozen more salmon out of the trap for Ben's evening meal. His father said, "We'll have to tell 6 Fathom Johnson you're raiding his trap." But I don't think he'll mind too much. As Ben was finishing the last salmon, Mark's mother came out with a part of a cake and put it on the ground by Ben. He left the salmon and he went and ate the cake. It was getting a little old, Ellen said. "Old? You baked it yesterday." So she said, "I'll bake another one." When Mark went to bed that night, Ben was prowling along the beach, investigating rocks and pools and pieces of driftwood. In the morning, when Mark rose, Ben was waiting for his handout of salmon and sweets. It was apparent that Ben had no desire to return to the stream to feed. He was doing just fine right here. But there was no stopping him from hiking off to his rock ledge for his afternoon nap. 2 mornings later, while Mark and his father were shunting a drifting log away from the trap, the red plane came over them and settled toward the beach by the stream. Mark was panicked. "Dad, the hunters are back. They're going to get Ben. What are we going to do?" His father had been watching the plane too, and now he said, "First we're going to push that log out so it won't punch a hole in our trap. After that we'll talk about it. But we're not going into a yelling fright, you understand? Ben is safe for the moment. He's right over there on that shore in front of the cabin. Now get your pike pole on this log, Mark, and help me get it around this trap." And when they rowed ashore after freeing the log, Mark's mother met them in the doorway. Her smiling lips were compressed and her brown eyes dark with fear. "I've seen that plane before, haven't I?" Mark's father nodded. "It's Mudhole Jones in with another trophy hunter." "Jones!" Mark cried. "Then he knows Ben's here?" "He knows." "It's possible," his father agreed. "Arnie Nichols could have told him for a price. And on the other hand, this is one of the biggest brown bear islands, and it's up in Jones's guiding territory. There's a lot of brownies up in that meadow and along the stream. Jones certainly knows about the meadow and the stream. It really doesn't matter if he knows about Ben or not. The important thing is, he's here looking for a trophy, and there's no bigger trophy than Ben." "We have to do something," Mark said frantically. "We've got to save Ben. Jones doesn't have any right to come out here and hunt him." "Actually," his father said, "he has every right. He's a licensed guide, and this is his guiding territory. When he brings in a hunter to kill a brown bear, he's doing his job. The hunter has every right to kill Ben or any other brownie that strikes his fancy. He's bought his license, hired his guide, and he's following every law." "Not Ben, he's tame." Mark's mother looked at Ben, who was a few feet away trying to get his big nose inside an empty syrup can. As he reached for the last sweet drop, "You're saying there's nothing we can do?" There were spots of color in her cheeks. We have to put up with this?" "I'm saying we can't drive those men off. They're within their rights. As for doing something, I think we can." He scratched his head. "A little unorthodox, maybe." "What?" Mark and his mother asked. "We can try to keep Ben out of their way, keep him away from the stream and the meadow. That's where they're going to hunt." "How do we do that?" Mark's mother asked. "Well, we're doing most of it now. Keep feeding him all the salmon he can eat every day, and those tidbits of sweets you've been giving him. If there's one thing a bear loves more than sweets, it's more sweets. If he gets all he wants here, he'll have no desire to return to the stream. He's proven that already. He hasn't been back for several days. I have an idea that's between all the salmon he can eat, plus the sweets, and his obvious liking for Mark's company. We can hold him here until Jones and his hunter kill some other brown bear or go somewhere else." "But he goes up on that rock ledge every afternoon for his nap," Mark said. "Well, he might forget and go to the stream instead of coming back." "I doubt it. Food and taste are the predominant drive in Ben's life. He's found both here. He's come back every day since he's found us. I'm betting he goes on doing that. Anyway, that's a chance we gotta take. We have no other way of holding him here." Mark said, "I'll get him some salmon right now," and headed for the rowboat to go to the trap. Mark's mother made grim motions of rolling up her sleeves. "Ben," looking at that big fella who was holding the syrup can between his paws and running his pink tongue around the inside, Your sweet tooth is really going to be indulged the next few days. I just hope the sugar holds you here." Mudhole Jones was mystified. He'd found Ben in this meadow before. He'd watched him parade up and down the bank while he was fishing. It was here he had brought the first hunter. It had taken several days to locate Ben, but they'd eventually spotted him crossing the meadow from the brush to the stream. They had stationed themselves directly in his path, and they'd waited. Then, surprisingly, Ben disappeared behind a small rise of land. Jones' client, a young man on his first big game hunt, had gotten nervous when another bear, a large one with an almost black coat, had appeared, so he killed it. Because the man was pleased with his trophy, Jones had not told him that it was not Ben. Now the salmon run was at its full swing, and all the bears were eating their fill of salmon, building up fat for their winter sleep. Ben should be here with the rest, claiming the finest fishing spot, gorging himself morning and evening on the choicest food for a brownie. He should be somewhere around the perimeter of the meadow in the afternoon, sleeping off the full meal of the morning in the shade of a brush or a rock. Like the others, between meals of fish, he should be feeding on the succulent grasses and roots of the meadows. For days now they had tramped the long, marshy meadow, fought their way through tangles of alders and brush looking for him. They had stationed themselves at fishing holes along trails that Jones knew were favorites of Brownie's, and had waited for hours. Not once had they glimpsed Ben. Not a single sign did Jones find that he had been about. Ben had simply vanished. After a rugged week, Jones was baffled and worried. He had promised his client, Peter King, a record-sized trophy, and the tough old man would settle for nothing less. Peter was an impatient man, and he was soon going to tire of chasing over this difficult landscape without even a glimpse of the bear he'd been assured was here. This was the first time Jones had guided King, and he was anxious that his client bag a trophy. If he did, King would return again and again. That meant thousands of dollars in fees in the future. Jones had learned much about King. The old man's reputation, as well as his appearance and bearing, awed the guide. King was a tough-looking, husky man with iron gray hair, an inch or so under 6 feet. He was head of a very large, successful King logging interest. With fists and boots, knowledge and shrewdness, he had fought his way to the very top of his profession. He was cross-grained and demanding. He was in the habit of ordering people around and being obeyed without question. King was careless of his own safety, and this worried Jones. As a guide, he was responsible for his client's safety. King had taken up trophy hunting late in life, and he loved to show off his trophies and make speeches about his hunts before various lodges and clubs. Tonight they were lounging by the tent, resting after another hard day and a fruitless day's hunt. King said, "You're sure this bear's as big as you said he was?" "Oh, he's the biggest I've ever seen in 20 years of guiding," Jones insisted. King stretched his legs and started to rub them. "We haven't seen hide nor hair of anything near the size you say. Maybe he's taken off for parts unknown. You ever thought of that?" "Oh, I've thought of it," Jones said. "It's possible. Brownies are unpredictable. You're never sure they'll do what you expect, but it's not likely he'd take off for other territory. He'd have to travel 10 miles in any direction to find another stream, and you won't catch a brownie far from fresh salmon during the run. They fish morning and night, and they stay close to the stream during that time." The lumber tycoon was listening, and the thought was balm to the guide's ego. He expanded on his knowledge. "I think we just missed him. It's easy to miss one in all this brush and high grass. He could be laying up, sleeping or resting, and we might walk within 30 feet and never see him. When you see him, he reared up about 20 feet. Could be the same with this big fella. This big one's really pretty cute." "No, these big ones get pretty cute. You should know, but I can't stay much longer. I've got business to do." King stopped rubbing his legs and stretched out on his back, head and shoulders propped against a log. "Be something to take home a big brown bear," he said softly. They lapsed into silence. Above the towering mountains, the setting sun turned the sky blood red. The color flowed down the bowl of the sky. It changed the high shape of the mountain into black silhouettes and lay thin shadows across the earth. King's mind was still on the hunt. All his life he had solved problems with patience. "We covered a lot of territory the past week. Any we might have missed?" None where a brownie would be. There's the stream and the meadow and the brush. That's brownie territory. The rest is those mountains you see a couple miles back from the beach. That's not brownie country. What about those mountains? King wanted to know. Jones shrugged. Just mountains like any others except for one, an odd shale mountain, but you won't find them up there either. There's no streams, no meadows, nothing for them to eat. What about this shale mountain? What's odd about it? It's a couple of miles straight back in. What makes it interesting is that its slopes are covered with loose shale in an area where there's hardly any rock. About 100 feet up or so, the mountain, a solid ledge of rock, juts out from the side like a tabletop, one of those weird things you might see sometimes. That's all. Attention to detail and never taking anything for granted had been two important things in King's success. Now he said, let's go up there anyway. As long as we're here, we might as well have a look. I'd like to see what it looks like. It's just a loose shale and rock mountain, some 200 or 300 feet high. I want to see it, King insisted. All right, Jones agreed, but he was angry. King was trying to take over from his guide again. But not tomorrow morning. I've got to fly to Orca City for supplies and to pick up any mail or telegrams for you, as we'd planned, remember? Soon as we get back, we'll hike up there. Good enough, King said. The following morning, as he was about to leave, Jones made the mistake of giving King a direct order in a voice that sounded commanding. Now listen, with luck, I'll be back in a couple of hours, so you stay close to camp. I don't want you ramming around this country alone. You might get lost or even chewed up by a brown bear. You understand? King looked at him without even answering. After the plane went, King strode back to camp, muttering, Get lost, huh? Chewed up by a brown bear. The one we can't find, I suppose. Important sounding little cuss. What does he think I am, a baby? King wandered about camp for an hour, but he was not the sort who could stand inactivity when there was something to do. He was still angry at Jones' commanding attitude. Little runt telling me what to do. I'm paying for this trip. I'm going where I want. He got his rifle, loaded it, and headed out through the brush in the direction of the shale mountain. That's the end of chapter 14.